Hey ghouls and gals, welcome back to my channel. Welcome to another weekly reading vlog. I am really excited to get started with this reading vlog. I have some very ambitious plans for this week. Today is Sunday, September 4th, and tomorrow is Labor Day, so I do not have work tomorrow, which is very exciting. And just for a lot of reasons, I'm going to have more free time to read this week, especially since I have a whole extra day off than I normally have. So I thought that I would just kind of read as much as I possibly could. I am in the mood for just huge chunky fantasy stories. Around this time of year, I always get the craving to just dive into a huge fantasy series or just like a huge fantasy book in general. It's that brief period of time where it's not quite summer anymore. It's the last couple days, weeks of summer, kind of moving into fall. It's not full fall. I'm not like full into spooky season and horror yet, but I'm just really craving some epic fantasy. So that is going to be my plan for this week, and boy do I have some chunky books planned to read. It is an intimidating page count, but I am in such a reading mood. I am just having such a good time reading. I've been picking up the best books that I feel like I can do it, and I do have one update for a book that I have actually finished. I did initially plan on vlogging this book, but I had so much fun reading it and just like such an experience reading it. I decided just to not focus on making a vlog, but just focus on reading it because I just felt like I wanted to just pay attention to just that book. And I think it was a great idea for me, at least. And that book would be Babel or Babel by RF Kuang. This is just like my most anticipated book of the year. So when I got my hands on it, I was just so excited to pick it up. I do have like introductory clips in this vlog, I believe, before this clip here where I'm starting to read this. I did initially plan on making a dedicated vlog for this book. However, just the experience of reading it, I just was so enthralled. I did pre-order this. I feel like as someone, if you're someone who pre-orders like a lot of books, you can kind of feel this with me as well. But sometimes when I pre-order books, it's great. They arrive a little bit early or right on time. Sometimes when I pre-order books, they don't come in for like a week or so, which is very frustrating because obviously when you pre-order a book, you're so excited about it. So this was one where I did not get it on release date. However, for this book, and ultimately I think it was like the best way for me at least to consume this book, I also got the audiobook in addition to the physical copy, just because I don't normally like double up like that. I did purchase a audiobook copy through Libro FM just because me and my partner like share my account on that, and he very much is someone who has to read via audiobook. It's so fascinating the way different learners and different readers can really capture a reading experience, but he loves audiobooks. I'm more of a physical book person. I definitely feel like that's my preferred reading experience. He loves audio, so when it is something, he also loves RF Kuang, so we will get her books on both audiobook to keep and then physically, just so we can both kind of read it at the same time in our preferred format. But I was so eager to start reading this. I started reading it on audiobook, and I think that was a wonderful idea, especially as someone who is American and does not speak any other languages. I just speak English, even though I was like taught very introductory Spanish in like grade school and high school. And then I did take Italian in college. I went to Florence for a summer and I was able to speak it not very well, but I was able to get around and speak Italian. But of course, I feel like maybe a lot of people can relate to this as well. After I was not immersed in Italy anymore and just stopped learning it, stopped taking classes, I just forgot it. So yeah, I only speak English, and for me this is such a language heavy book. The audiobook narrator is absolutely incredible, especially if you do not speak, I would say, Mandarin. Then you'll want to pick up the audiobook because I love language. It's so cool. This was such a good audiobook reading experience, and really hearing all the different languages, which are very, very integral to this story. So I don't want to go too in depth in this one, partly because I feel like this has been everywhere. I know it's on a lot of people's anticipated reads lists, or it's just been getting a lot of publicity, a lot of chatter in the book world. So definitely, I feel like a lot of people have already heard a synopsis, but very briefly. And I'm gonna read the full title because the full title is very long. It's Babel, or The Necessity of Violence, an arcane history of the Oxford Translators Revolution. So this takes place in our world, like kind of like an alternate history, an alternate past of our world. Starts in 1828 in London, and this is a historical fantasy epic, and it deals with student revolutions, it deals with colonialism, and it also deals with translation as a tool for upholding empire. So very fascinating. I definitely recommend you picking this up in any single format that you can, because this is just an absolutely epic story. I was completely enthralled. I absolutely love it. If you love dark academia for any reason, if you like just the aesthetic, if you like the social themes that are explored in dark academia, this is like the genre at the top of its game. We follow our main character, Robin Swift, who is Chinese, who was born in Canton. He's orphaned at a very young age and adopted by Professor Lovell, who is a professor who works at the Academy of Royal Translation in Babel in Oxford University. As a young boy, Robin is brought up learning not just his native tongue of Cantonese and Mandarin, he's also taught English, Greek, Latin. He's taught so many different languages to become a translator at this exclusive institute. He goes to this institute. There he meets other students like himself from a variety of different backgrounds who receive this wonderful opportunity that non-white, non-male students would not have any other place in England other than Babel to learn at this prestigious institution and become translators for the crown. However, as Robin proceeds throughout his time at the university, he kind of starts realizing that his Chinese heritage and his new allegiances to his caretaker, Professor Lovell, and also his allegiances to Babel and the crown will put him at odds with each other, because translation is a tool of empire, which makes it very complex. This is such a complex story talking about so many issues, and I think RF Kuang handles them wonderfully, wonderfully well. So if you like dark academia, if you like historical fantasy, if you liked the Poppy War and the themes explored in the Poppy War, I think this is just a wonderful book for you. Definitely one of my favorite books of the year. I absolutely loved it, so highly recommend. But I did read that last week, and I would say not only is it one of my favorite books of the year, it's probably one of my favorite books of all time. RF Kuang is one of my favorite writers. Really, from the Poppy War, I fell in love with her writing, her characters, her stories, so I'm so excited to see what she comes out with next. But definitely that is one where just the whole time I just felt so immersed in an experience that it was absolutely incredible. I can't say enough good things about it. I absolutely loved it. I can't say that enough. Now moving on to the books that I plan on reading this week. Definitely you can see more chunky books. Babel was one of those books where I finished it and just felt like an immense love for reading, an immense love for storytelling, and that gets me in such a good reading mood. Also, I have to be very strategic, very careful to not fall into a reading slump, because I feel like very relatable, a lot of us sometimes, at least me, when I read a wonderful book, sometimes I can get in a little bit of a reading slump or get nervous trying to figure out what to pick up next, because I know that whatever I pick up is just not going to be as good as that 5-star book maybe that I read last. So definitely both pros and cons to reading an absolutely wonderful story. But like I mentioned a couple of times now, I'm in the mood for huge fantasy tomes. So I found two of the chunkiest ones that I could think of. One is a new release. It just came out last month. The other one I believe is not necessarily backlist. I believe it came out in 2015, so some years ago now, like 7 years ago, so over 5 years ago now. But that is the one that I have started. I am about 128 pages into it, so about 20% give or take. But that would be The Grace of Kings, the first book in the Dandelion Dynasty. Yes, book 1 of of the Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu. I'll definitely try and give a good synopsis. I do find it kind of hard for fantasy when I haven't finished the whole story yet to give like a very succinct synopsis, but this one is following the empire of Dara, and it was once divided into 7 different kingdoms. However, one emperor years and years ago took over all of the kingdoms, and now they're all united under one empire. So when this king united the lands into an empire, some thought it would bring peace and ends to all the turmoil. Instead, it brought stagnation and suffering, the anger of the gods, and finally a rebellion. So we're following 2 main characters, and the first one is Kunigaru, and he is a commoner, and he's really more concerned about his own well-being and his family's well-being, just kind of enjoying day to day and surviving more than like any higher cause, until he falls in love and also kind of starts seeing that there is maybe more to life, that he might have a higher calling, and that this empire is possibly unjust. We also follow our secondary main character, Matazindu, and he is like the last surviving member of a family of one of like the clan leaders of one of the kingdoms who are all extinguished under the empire's rule, and he wants to bring vengeance upon this empire and this emperor, the one who has killed his whole entire family. So he really wants to seek vengeance and gain the reputation and the power that his family once held. Now, I haven't gotten here yet. It does say on the dust jacket though that these 2 characters do eventually meet, they become fast friends, and they wage separate wars against vast conscripted armies and silk-draped airships in order to wrest Dara from cruelty. I have heard, I just saw a random TikTok one day honestly saying that this was such intense and wonderful characterization, character building, and they just really love the story, so I picked it up. Figured I'd give it a shot. Again, I'm about 20% of the way through this one, and I am really enjoying it. Definitely, I haven't gotten too far into it. So 100 pages in, we've really only met our main characters, and they haven't met each other yet, but it is very fascinating reading these 2 young men and potentially how they have the favor of the gods on their side, maybe, and how they have very different reasons for potentially maybe wanting to stand up against an empire or topple an empire. So I'm very excited to read more in this one. And then I do have another one which I requested, and I did not realize it was going to be so massive until I got it in from the library. I think this one is about 800 pages. I think this one is 500 or 600. So I would also like to read this one. Again, very ambitious TBR for this week, but I think I can do it. And that would be The First Binding by R.R. Virdi. And this says is the first novel of a new epic fantasy series, and it's from Tor. It says it's the Tales of Tremaine. So yeah, I don't know anything about this. I'm gonna pick it up, go in fairly blind. I've been hearing this is a good new fantasy for some early reviews that I've seen, so I will talk about this more once I pick it up, but I am reading The Grace of Kings. I hope I didn't say The Way of Kings. It's a very, I feel like, popular fantasy title setup. Nothing against the author, obviously, but The Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. I always get this mixed up, so I'm really trying to remember it's The Grace of Kings, not The Way of Kings. And I feel like grace and way are kind of very similar words too, maybe, but I talk too much. My camera is overheating. It's getting mad at me. So I am going to go get some reading in, enjoy my Sunday. I'm gonna enjoy it a lot more, I feel like, than most other Sundays, just because I have Monday off too. So no Sunday scaries for me this week because I have a whole other day off. So I'm gonna go get some reading in, and I will talk to you all later. So it is currently Thursday. I do have an update for one of my books, not the other. I'm still working my way through The Grace of Kings. I'm really enjoying this one. I'm about halfway through, and I've got to say, if you like character-driven stories, if you like stories that have a whole lot of character development and character explanation and just like short little character studies, I think you would really like this. I'm so intrigued by it. This is a book that takes its time to not only delve into the characters of our main characters, but we do see throughout this empire, throughout this resistance fight, we kind of get in the heads of different characters, so you can see everything that's going on. Some characters you only get to see because it is third person omniscient narration, but we only get to see some characters' point of view for a chapter. And the amount of characterization and the amount where you really feel like you kind of know, at least on an acquaintance level, these very minor characters that you never see again, the level of character work here is so fascinating, and I think that's what's really making this book stand out to me. I think that's what's really making this kind of enjoyable for me to read, because I will say it's kind of a premise that we see a lot in fantasy, at least to this point. I will say I'm halfway through. I feel like a lot of things have happened that I thought might be towards the end of the book, or I thought might be in sequels. So I will say I'm not sure where this series is going. Some of the events, if you can imagine, like an unjust ruler, unjust empire, there's a resistance that's rising up to fight against it. It's not like a groundbreaking premise in terms of fantasy. It is very much like a military fantasy and a political fantasy as well. So it's not necessarily, I don't want to sound mean because I am really enjoying this, but it's not necessarily like, I don't think the plot will surprise you, not in a bad way, but I think when you're reading it and you're inside the minds of these characters and you're seeing their political strategies and their military strategies, you can kind of see with them and experience and understand what's going on in a very believable way almost. So I am really enjoying that. It's definitely not one where there's, at least I feel like, going to be a huge plot twist, but honestly, just because the characterization is just so good, that you really understand these characters and what they're going to do next and their thought processes behind all their actions. So very much a character study book, and I'm really enjoying it. That's it for my reading updates, but I do have some very exciting book mail that I'm gonna go ahead and show, because I'm very excited for both of these books, or rather I've read one, but I was excited for this copy. So I did get a UK copy of Babel by RF Kuang. This is the Waterstone signed edition, has black sprayed edges. I've already talked about in this vlog how much I loved this book. Again, I read this book I think now a little bit over 2 weeks ago. I already want to reread this book again. I'm absolutely in love with it. I have this copy and then the US copy. I love RF Kuang's writing. I'm very excited. This is like a very beautiful book. This is a very beautiful book. It's definitely a book that I'm going to reread over and over again. So I'm very excited to have that one. And then the next book is actually a little sneak peek at my next reading vlog, because I'm definitely going to be diving into this one, and that will be Fairy Tale by Stephen King, latest Stephen King release. I pick up every single one of his releases right when they come out, so I'm very excited to hopefully maybe read it this weekend. I'm not sure. It's kind of derailing my reading plans, because while I am enjoying the fantasy that I'm reading right now, this is also fantasy, also kind of like a horror fantasy, so maybe we'll switch up the TBR, but I am going to try and keep my initial reading plans for this vlog and then read this one, have its own dedicated vlog maybe next week. So yes, very excited to pick this one up. I'm just so excited that King is not returning, because he kind of like dabbles in lots of different genres, but I really love his speculative, his horror, his fantasy a lot more than like the hard-boiled detective or more of like mystery detective stories. So very excited to dive into this one, but that is pretty much it for this update. I'm really excited to keep reading, hopefully maybe finish, I don't think I'm gonna finish it tonight, but hopefully finish The Grace of Kings soon. And that is pretty much it for this reading update. I will talk to you all later. Happy Friday, happy weekend. I did have a slate change in reading plans, if you can't already guess from my last update and how excited I was about certain books. I ended up getting a skip the line copy of Fairy Tale by Stephen King, the audiobook, when I was at work today. I put myself on hold as a long shot, just because I had purchased this physical copy and I do like reading in tandem. However, the line at my library was several months long wait for the audiobook, but I just went ahead and placed it anyway just to see. I was really not anticipating getting it today, but I do. I don't know if you guys have this on Libby or if you know what Libby is. It's an audiobook app, but for one of my library cards, the library does have skip the line holds. So it'll be like it's your lucky day holds, and you can get a shortened period of time and kind of skip the line and read the book, but it's for a shorter amount of time. So I did end up picking this up today and I could not put it down. So when I came home, I checked the spot where I was at in the audiobook and I am on page 220. So yeah, I wanted to make a dedicated reading vlog for this, but I wasn't anticipating enjoying the audiobook so much. That's partly one of the reasons why I didn't purchase the audiobook. I purchased the physical copy just because Stephen King audiobooks, depending on who's narrating them, are so hit or miss for me. I do really enjoy this audiobook, and I just was immediately drawn in, as you can tell from, you know, me already being about 200 pages in. I do want to switch to the physical copy and actually read it physically, but I'm gonna be doing that this weekend, and I'm really enjoying it. I'm really glad that I'm enjoying it. I will say, dog lovers, this is gonna hit, I think. I don't know if you can tell from the US version. There is a dog and she features quite heavily. She's a German Shepherd named Radar, and yeah, it's already kind of been quite a sentimental book so far, so I'm a little nervous about how the dog's going to fare by the end of the book, but I am really enjoying this. And I did also read some more of The Grace of Kings. I'm still enjoying it. I'm about 60 to 70% of the way through this one. Very interesting. If you like military or political fantasy, I would recommend. I will say I am enjoying it. However, there's like a very shocking lack of female characters. This is a fantasy that does feel like it's set in the past, even though it's in a different world than ours. A lot of the world building feels like a very Asian inspired but medieval sort of setting. So there are like irritating gender roles in here. It's definitely not the most progressive of fantasies in that way. The female main characters, there really are none, but the two female characters that we've spent the most page time with don't really have like the most fleshed out characters, the best roles. They're kind of just, they serve one purpose and they're very one-dimensional. So that is something that I have heard gets better as the books go on, but definitely in this one I definitely have noticed that that's my biggest complaint so far, is that it is very interesting as a book. The characterization is interesting, the conflict is interesting, there's just such a lack of female characters and female characters who actually like feel like they're characters of their own as opposed to supporting roles for the men in their lives. So yes, these are my reading plans for this weekend. Still hoping to get to the first binding. I'm really excited to read that one as well. But what I have planned this weekend, I'm also going to be watching all the Paranormal Activity movies. That's like a very guilty pleasure series for me. They're not objectively that great, but Paranormal Activity was one of the very first horror movies that I watched. So they kind of have a special place in my heart for that. They're just enjoyable. They're also leaving Paramount Plus at the end of September, and I was planning on watching them in October, but I just figured this weekend would be really fun to just have a little marathon. So I'll be doing that as well, and reading some good books. So I'm gonna go get to doing that, start making some dinner, but I will talk to you all with another update later. happy Saturday. I had a really good night last night watching some okay found footage films. Found footage is definitely my guilty pleasure genre of horror movies. Like, even if they're very, very bad, I can still find something to enjoy about them. I don't know. But I will be continuing on with that movie marathon today. But I have some reading updates, not so much for The Grace of Kings because I've just been so obsessed with fairy tale, and I don't think I've actually kind of talked about what it's about in this vlog just yet, but I am about 60% of the way through it. So in terms of synopsis, we do have our main character, Charlie Reed. He's 17 years old. He's had like a very rocky home life, just some personal tragedies. His mother died when he was very, very young, and his father has been dealing with alcoholism pretty much his entire life. He befriends a neighbor on his street that no one else really has gotten the opportunity to know. The kids on the block and the neighborhood call it the psycho house because it looks like Norman Bates' house. The person who lives in it is just very eccentric, keeps to himself, has a very large dog, and everyone just kind of keeps away from him. A chance encounter brings Charlie and Mr. Bowditch together. They form an unlikely friendship, and then Charlie is kind of ushered into this new secret that might be on Mr. Bowditch's property, and he discovers a whole other world and potentially a prophecy of sorts that he might be the one to actually complete it and save this world from danger. So it is a little bit tropey. It's a young, I'm just a kid, I'm a normal kid, and then finding a new spectacular world where he is the chosen one. On purpose though, it is called fairy tale, and it is dealing with different fairy tale tropes in a very both horror way. It's definitely not like sanitized Disney versions of fairy tales. It's the original Grimm's version of fairy tales, and then it's also our main character is very aware that he does feel like he's in a book, and he feels like these things that are happening are like fairy tales, so kind of self-aware in those aspects. I will comment more on this when I've finished with it. I do tentatively want to say this might be a good introduction for people who want to try Stephen King and have never read a Stephen King book before, because there is a lot of page time that goes into character development, building up the characters, building up the story before we even get to the premise. That is the book's actual premise. I feel like that's very, very standard for a Stephen King book, but I thought it was so enjoyably done in here that I think if you want to try Stephen King and you're a little nervous about maybe things that you have heard where he's very, very lengthy in terms of description, and his books can be a little slow, I think this might be one to kind of get a sense for his tone. I will comment on that when I finish. It definitely has, the first section of the book feels very different to the section I'm in right now, and I definitely don't mind that. I think it's done really, really well. So where it does feel like two very different stories kind of merging into one, it's done in a really good way. I'm just really, really enjoying this one. And yeah, I've said this before, I know, but dog lovers, I have a shepherd mix, and he's about 6-7 years old. So just reading some of the things in here about just how like dogs enrich your life, and unfortunately the cruelty of just becoming so attached to an animal that is hopefully going to have like such a shorter lifespan than you, is just very, very tragic. So definitely be warned, there is a lot of discussion. A lot of the plot revolves around this aging German shepherd named Radar and the bonds that both the elderly Mr. Bowditch and the very young Charlie Reed both have with this elderly dog. So keep that in mind if that might be like a sensitive thing for you at the moment. If you've recently, I would say if you've recently dealt with pet loss, or if you have an elderly dog yourself, then I would maybe not pick this up. I feel like it would be too raw. I've had pets before that unfortunately have died because of old age. I don't think I would have been able to read this story close to the time that was happening to me. So just keep that in mind, that a large portion of the story revolves around that. I don't think it's really mentioned on the dust jacket at all, or in the synopsises that I've seen at all, or even the synopsis synopsis that I kind of gave to, but just as like a little bit of a trigger warning, that's definitely a big theme in here, is just dog mortality, because unfortunately they don't live as long as humans. So yeah, keep that in mind if you want to pick this up. But I am really enjoying it, and I do anticipate honestly being able to finish both of these this weekend. I'm having a good time reading both of them. I don't think, obviously I'm not going to finish any other books this weekend because both of these are more than 600 pages long, but I'm hoping to at least finish both of these, maybe start another book by the end of the weekend. We'll have to see, but I'm having a lot of fun. I'm going to go get some reading done, watch some really fun, kind of cheesy horror movies, and I will talk to you all later. So it is now time to end the vlog, and I did manage to finish both of my books. Was a little light on the updating at the end just because I was really enjoying both books, had a really good time reading both of them. So Grace of Kings, we'll talk about this one first. I know I did say I had some qualms with some of the women characters, and the society is like very gendered and stereotypical when it comes to men and women and their roles and what they're expected to do and what they're able to do. However, there were some introductions of characters near the end of the book where I did feel like that was probably a critique of the society. And since this book in this series I think is going to continue to really dive into this empire and the kingdoms and just military and political different factions and how to make the empire the best empire and different people's ways of doing that, I think it is going to be addressed in the series, so I will continue. I have heard that the books do get better in terms of that. So while I did feel like most female characters were pretty one-dimensional, I did see some progress towards the end of the book and potentially some characters that are going to have a bigger role in the next book. So I am continuing. I did already get book 2 from my library, and I thought this was a chunky book. The second book is even bigger, so I will be continuing on with this series as soon as possible. So potentially in the next reading vlog you might see me diving into this one. It is massive. It's almost 900 pages, so yeah, it's a tome. But I did really enjoy this one overall, and I do think if you do like very political, very military fantasies, I do think it's intriguing. Like I said, the character work is very interesting in the way that no character is like really fleshed into, but you get to see these big significant historical events happening from so many different points of view, and you really feel like you dive into different characters' minds for a brief moment in time. You know them, you are them, and then you move on to a different character. So definitely very like character heavy, but in a different way, where you get to experience a lot of different characters, a lot of different motives in here. Very fascinating stuff. And then I also finished Fairy Tale by Stephen King. I really enjoyed this one. I definitely tend to prefer his genre fiction to the more like contemporary detective fiction, so I did really enjoy this. I will say I do think it's kind of a tropey story on purpose. It's very self-aware of like the different tropes, because you are following a boy who is a very normal, ordinary boy, finds a portal to another world and might be the chosen one. But our main character is very like cognizant of that fact and comments on it. And King did say in the author's notes that during the pandemic he really wanted to write something kind of self-indulgent and write something that would make him happy. So that's why he wrote a kind of horror-inspired fairy tale, which he did use the real fairy tales. And fairy tale is definitely more of a Brothers Grimm fairy tale than a Disney fairy tale. So I did really enjoy that. I will say the thing that really stood out to me, and the reason that I loved this so much, was the main character Charlie and his relationship with Radar the dog. You can see they're both on the cover. That was just done so well. I think if you have ever had a dog, if you've ever really had a pet in your life, I think you can relate to having this creature that hopefully, obviously because you don't want to die done. But usually this animal is not going to outlive you. Pets do not live as long as humans do, unfortunately, and kind of diving into the bittersweet and pure love that you can have between a human and a pet, and just kind of the process of having to watch someone who is, I'll just say someone, you know, even though it is a pet, they're part of your family, who is so close to you, and knowing more than them about mortality, everything like that, and watching them slowly start to age. I would say if you've recently lost a pet, maybe don't pick this one up, because definitely I think King is writing from a place of experience. And if you've ever loved a pet, especially, I have a shepherd mixed dog, so this just really hit close to home. It was one of the best dogs I feel like that I've read in fiction, and one of the best dog-human relationships, and that was a big part of this, as well as like the fairy tale escapades, and I absolutely loved that. I thought that relationship was so wonderfully done, so bittersweet. It really tugged on my heartstrings. So I just thought that was so well done. It was a very entertaining story. Audiobook had a surprise cameo from Stephen King himself, so that was really fun to listen to. I got to listen to the audiobook while I was reading it, and I thought it was a really fun experience. It just is so beautifully illustrated too. It was a really fun reading experience. Definitely, I think this is like my first true fantasy from King. I haven't read the Dark Tower series yet. I haven't read Eye of the Dragon yet, so I do plan on reading those, because I just thought this was absolutely wonderful. Highly enjoyed, definitely lived up to the hype, at least for me, and I really enjoyed reading it. So I read over 1,000 pages this week, had a lot of fun, watched a lot of good movies, but that is going to be it for this week's reading vlog. If you enjoyed it, please be sure to give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel for more content. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!